Hi, this is Dan and Lexi from Dan Schultz Outdoors, reminding you to keep the adventures alive.
Hey y'all, I'm Johnny.
And I'm Colleen. And we're the Keel Quest. And we want you to keep the adventures alive. Cheers!
Hey, this is Darren from Ride Paddle Repeat, encouraging you to keep the adventures alive.
This is David from Beasley Ironworks saying keep the adventures alive.
I'm Jay. Let's go. From Jay's Way, keep the adventures alive.
Hi, I'm Kevin Collin, the Happy Camper. Remember, keep the adventures alive. Awesome!
Woo, buddy! Shug here! Keep the adventures alive. I am.
Ethan here, the Avid Outdoorsy Guy, reminding you to keep the adventures alive.
We're John and Aaron.
Keep the adventures alive.
Hey everyone, it's Kylan from Lure of the North, and I encourage you to keep the adventures alive.
This is Sky North telling you, keep the adventures alive. And now on with the show.
Tonight's episode of Canoehounds Outdoor Adventure Show is brought to you by OTG Meals. Fresh, freeze-dried, small-batch meals made for people on the go. Algonquin Outfitters, with 4 key locations in and around Algonquin Park to serve your backcountry needs. Kid Products, stick stoves and reflector ovens proudly made in Canada. And Novacraft Canoes, connecting you with nature in Canadian-made canoes since 1970. Well, hello and happy Tuesday evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Canoehounds Outdoor Adventure Show, a show that's going to bring you a lot closer to the great outdoors. My name is Dennis, also known as Canoehound, and if this is your first time here, thanks very much for tuning in. Hopefully we can make a believer out of you, make you hit that thumbs up and that subscribe button. Anyways, we do have a bit of a barn burner of a show for you here tonight. We got a great topic of spring canoe planning and safety tips for those of you that might be planning to get out there here, when the ice out season comes in. And we want to make sure everybody's out there and staying warm and staying safe and staying dry, But before we get on with tonight's guests and our topic, we do have a few announcements to get out of the way. Really busy week for this guy. A lot has gone on, especially this past weekend. But first off, if you missed last week's show and you happen to be maybe looking into planning a trip to Wabakimi, or maybe you've already been or you're thinking about going, you know what? Check out last week's show. We had members of Friends of Wabakimi on the show, and we learned so much about the park, about trip planning there, about features of the park, and all the things that Friends of Wabakimi do to keep the Wabakimi area so in such a pristine state. So you know what, it's a really good show. If you have any interest at all in that, make sure you go back to our past episodes playlist and you'll find that there. It was last week's show. This past weekend was a really fun one. I attended the 11th annual Ontario Backcountry Canoe Symposium, which is held in Waterloo, Ontario. You know what? Really great show. There were all kinds of fantastic vendors on hand, all kinds of great gear. Got to meet up with a bunch of people that I know. It's always fun to be able to do that, right? And then, of course, they had all kinds of great presentations. They had 4 presentations, 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. They had Evan Ferrari was one of the presenters. John Boboluk, who has been a presenter there at the show a number of times. Camper Christina also presented, and then of course Kevin Callan was the final presenter at the show, and he did how to be a happy camper. We all know what Kevin's like. He's always in a chipper mood, so it was a really entertaining presentation by all of them. Even with the little poor Christina had some electrical gremlins with her clicky thing there for her presentation, and they give her fits, but you know what, she did a fantastic job. So Christina, if you happen to be in the chat, you did a fine job. Way to go, girl. You know, it was a fantastic show on a very dreary day. I don't know if everybody watching the show experienced the weather that we had on Saturday. Started out with rain and then high winds later in the day, and you know what? The show is as good as it was. It kind of finished on a bit of a sad note. David Bain, the organizer, had announced that this here was going to be the very last symposium that he's putting together. No more winter camping symposium, no more Ontario Backcountry Canoe Symposium. And you know what? I'm just grateful to have been able to participate and go there as you know, as a person just taking all this in. And just to see the amount of work that David Bain and his helpers have put into this show for, like, I think they said they've done about 15 episodes of this show, or 15 symposiums. This one being the 11th for the Ontario Backcountry. And you know what? Kind of bittersweet. We'd hate to see it go, but knowing how much work goes into these things, well, you know what, David, you relax, you enjoy, and get out there and do some paddling, because you've done a fantastic job with this. And who knows, maybe somebody will pick it up. We don't know. But in the meantime, it was fantastic. And you know what? It was, everybody there is very classy. When they first heard that this is going to be the last show, there was a lot of, you know, and it's like just disappointment from you know, from the people that enjoy going to these things so often and so much. But you know what, the day after David made that announcement, Camper Christina, Hap Wilson, and Kevin Callan got up on stage, and they had a couple of presentations for David. Hap Wilson presented David with a couple of beautiful pieces of artwork that he had done. And then Camper Christina and Kevin presented David with a paddle from Badger Paddles, one side of which had the inscription of the logos for both events on one side of the blade, and then on the other side was one of David's favorite Canadian flags, which I would believe is like 153 years old or something like that. But he had that also laser etched into the other side of the paddle. So David was quite surprised and taken back by that. And then the whole event finished off with, how fitting, a standing ovation for David. So David, if you're watching now, or if you happen to be watching this at a later time, congratulations on retiring from the symposiums. We're going to miss it, but you know what? You enjoy yourself, and yeah, just get out there and do some paddling, man. That's awesome. So for any of you that were there, you got to experience it. It was quite touching and quite fun. Let's see here. Something that I was really hoping to get Tori Baird on the show early on here, just because she has organized a auction on Instagram called Camp for a Cure. And basically, it's the bidding started on March 25th, and it's to benefit Fox G1 Research. Essentially, Jim Baird and Tori Baird, their son Wesley, has Fox G1 syndrome, and it's you know what, I'm sure as any parent that may have a child with any sort of disability or anything like that, it's quite taxing on a parent. The love is all there, of course, but it is strenuous. But she's putting on this auction to raise funds to bring awareness and to put towards research for Fox G1, because you never know. They can find a cure for some things, right? So if you haven't already done so, head on over to Instagram, look for Camp for a Cure. There's all kinds of fantastic products on there, and throw in a bid, man. Bid high. You know what? You'll see the value of all the stuff on there. Get on there and bid high, and you know what? Throw some money towards research, and you might just win the bidding on something that maybe you're going to buy already, or just to support the cause. So by all means, get on over there. So that's once again, that is Camp for a Cure on Instagram, and you'll see all the cool products that they have there. And bidding closes 8 p.m. this coming Thursday. So you only got a couple days to get your bids in there. So get on over and you know what? Make it count, guys and gals. Make it happen. Just looking over here, because I just wanted to thank really quickly here, Lynn, Benny, and Steve for your coffee contributions this week. Thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated. Just as I reach around for my coffee, let's take a dip, everybody. And that's awesome. And then just a couple more quick little things. Happy birthday shout out to my good friend and my regular canoe partner, Jay. Jay celebrated a birthday a few days back. And I actually called and wished him a happy birthday on the wrong day. What a good friend I am, right? But I'm a guy. I'm not supposed to remember birthdays and stuff. I can't even remember my own half the time. So, but happy birthday to you, Jay, and many, many more, of course. And looking forward to getting up to Wabakimi with you this year paddling. That's going to be a real cool time. As you can see right now, I got all my channel members just sort of drifting across the bottom. Thank you very much for your channel support. Not sure if everybody's seen the posting that I put on Instagram and Facebook, but for my channel members, just as another perk recognition, I'm putting together this little membership badges program. Here we go. This is a completely filled up thing. So basically, this is a sticker, and it comes to a new member with the new member sticker already in place. You can see that there. And then when you reach milestones as being a channel member, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years, you will receive little tiny stickers to put on there. And just to recognize milestones for your membership. It's just another thing that I like to say thank you to my channel members for all this. So anybody that's already a channel member that's floating across the bottom there, I've already sent out a bunch, but I don't have everybody's mailing address. So if you can, please do me a favor. If you want one of these, please drop me an email at canoehound@gmail.com. Shoot me your mailing address, and I'd be happy to send one of these out to you. And you know what? Let's have a little bit of fun with stickers. What the heck, right? Just to give you a little perspective on size, here's my water bottle. And, so it would fit on an Algene or any type of food barrel. So if you're a channel member and you want one of them, please do drop me your email or your mailing address. And if you are not a channel member, you can hit the join button down here at any time. And you know what? Maybe become a channel member. You know what? And we'll get you started with your sticker. And like I say, let's have some fun with stickers. Yeah. You know what? I think that is pretty much all of it. Once again, you know what? We have a great topic going on for tonight. By all means, audience participation is more than appreciated. Just put the word question before your questions. If you have any questions for myself or the panelists, I will star them and I will try to get them up at it like as a rapid fire towards the end of the show, unless it's fitting for the section that we're talking about. So by all means, get your questions in. And also, you know what, if you want to pop up here on screen, please do. Love to have you up here, answer a question or two. And we might even make that happen before the second half of the show. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's topic. You know what? With the nice weather we had the other day, it was quite nice out there. I got out there, washed the truck and stuff, and that just kept going through my mind. Man, I'd love to put the canoe in the water. Man, I'd love to put the canoe in the water. It made me start to think about about this spring canoe trip planning. And many of us, I got a poll going right now. What do we got? We got 48% of people saying that they are going on a spring ice out trip, 28% saying no, and 25% saying sure. Well, you know what? this is going to be an education for all of us anyway. So let's just bring on a couple of guests, and we're going to talk about spring trip planning and safety, of course, because it's a very serious time. Our two guests have been on the show before. You know them just by seeing them here on screen. They've been on many times and covering various topics. So let's just start here. We got good old Pine Martin, and we got Nate Muskoka. How you doing, gents?
Hey, doing well.
Good stuff. Well, thanks for joining us or tuning in with us tonight to share some knowledge and maybe get people feeling safe out there when it comes to springtime paddling, because it could be pretty challenging, right? Yeah. You know what? We'll start with there's a lot of differences between the spring and summer paddling. Obviously, eh? What are some of the biggest differences that you would think of there, Martin?
Between spring and summer?
Yeah.
Well, they're cold.
Yeah, right.
They're cold, and especially the temperature of the water. That's always my biggest concern. My biggest concern is not actually the temperature of the air around me, although that's really something to dress for and anticipate. But what really always concerns me the most is the temperature of the water, because when you go camping late in the season, in autumn, and things are starting to freeze up and stuff like that, sure, there's ice on the water. That water is nowhere near as cold in the autumn before total freeze up as it is soon after freeze up. That water is just killing cold in the spring. And so that's what I worry the most about. And I am not someone who goes out with a wetsuit or a dry suit. And really, if you're going to be in a big body of water in a remote area, honestly, a dry suit is to be recommended. But I don't do that. I wait a little later in the season to go, and I plan trips according to the possibility that I could end up in the water, which means I choose my route according to that risk. So I'm not going to be going across Opeongo. I'm not going to be going across big windy lakes. If I am, I'm going to go when it's really calm, early in the morning. Dead calm. I'll try to hug shorelines and things like that. And of course, I'll have my PFD, and I'll have a dry bag full of dry clothes, so that and my ditch kits, so that if I end up in the water, I'm not trying to salvage my gear in my canoe. I'm trying to get out of the water. And if that means getting in the canoe, great. But if I can't get into the canoe, and I just need to get to shore, then I need to have very little with me that I can carry, that can be tethered, and that I have a kit that will allow me to absolutely make fire, foolproof, with cold fingers, make fire. And I have to have dry clothes to change into, because it doesn't matter. You can make a big bonfire, but if you're soaking wet in wet clothes at those temperatures, you're a goner. So that, for me, is the biggest concern, is the temperature of the water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to anybody that has never planned an ice out trip or has never been on an ice out trip, as you mentioned, the water temperatures are frigid. I know a few years ago, my solo ice out trip that I did, there was still like remnants of ice floating across Smoke Lake in Algonquin Park, right? And you put your hand in the water, and it actually, you feel the pins and needles from the cold. So yeah, it's definitely something you want to make sure you are prepared for, right? Nate, what are some other things that you would or that you could add that the biggest differences between an ice out trip or an early spring trip and what you would experience in even summer or fall for that matter?
Yeah, so Martin's actually pretty good at pointing this out, and he uses the example of the water is actually colder in the spring than it is in the fall, right? So the water in the fall has had all summer to warm up, and and it's still just starting to cool down when we start to pull out our black puffy coats and flannel, right? In the spring, it's a little different, because mentally we are really, really ready for that warm weather, and the sun is out, and we're all of a sudden able to walk around in t-shirts, and we want to go for a paddle, and of course the sun feels great, and it makes it very sort of, there's an easy feeling to those first few weeks of double digit temperatures and sunshine, but the water is still just as cold as it was when it was still covered in 6 inches of ice, or it can be, right? So Mentally, we just need to sort of wrap our heads around that the water we're paddling on, even though the sun is warm, is extremely very, 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 very cold. And yeah, as Martin pointed out, having a ditch kit with all the necessary implements to change clothes and create fire is pretty crucial. I think just not leaping into maybe a longer trip, especially if you haven't done a lot of camping over the winter, or a lot of people get really ambitious because they're super stoked for paddling season, and maybe are just not quite realizing how cold and challenging the night still might be, how cold the water is. And so maybe dialing back the ambitions of a lengthy spring trip in favor of a shorter one, or in favor of a route where, if something does go wrong, maybe you're a little closer to help, or, you're able to change your route accordingly, and not be stuck out somewhere extremely remote when you have really variable weather going on. That is, it's going to be a lot more challenging than it would in, say, even October, right?
Mm-hmm. Not only the water is cold, but you know what? Being spring, your days could be obviously still much colder, single digits. You can still, even during ice out, experience snow, depending on the weather. You don't know what Mother Nature's going to show at you, right, or throw at you. So you have all these different things that you have to factor in. Like while you're out there on the water paddling, yeah, sure, the water's cold, but the air could be cold. In around the water, you're going to have this thermal area, this thermal match just giving off cool air, as opposed to being far inland. So not only that, you have to consider what you're wearing while you're paddling, which could also be a detriment should you ever dump your canoe, right? Because you're wearing more clothing for that matter.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Martin's point about the dry suit thing sort of is something to be taken seriously, and a lot of people. So with the dry suit thing, there's a couple ways to think about it. If you're somewhere remote on a large body of water, then absolutely, it just makes sense, right? And it's a big investment. So dry suits are not inexpensive. A decent wetsuit is not inexpensive, right? A decent wetsuit requires you to get wet before it starts working, and a dry suit is going to seal the water out around your limbs, your torso, etc. Right? So the way a dry suit is constructed, just it means it's a much more expensive piece of equipment, right? You can pay as much for a dry suit as you can for a used canoe, for sure, 100%. So if you're like, well, you know what? There's just no way I'm going to buy a dry suit. Then where you're paddling and when might need to reflect that in the interests of your safety. So, and the ditch kit is a big part of that. And one thing I would just ask Martin to clarify is that, so what I have, I always like to paddle the Big East River, the lower Big East River in the spring, as soon as I can, as soon as it's all clear, because it's a great way to sort of, get my paddle in the water and sort of warm up for spring paddling season. I'm fairly close to shore at all times. The current is usually fairly slow, never without cell service, et cetera, et cetera. But I will have a ditch kit with me, right? So I'm going to have a dry backpack, like a roll top dry backpack, with all of the things that Martin mentioned in it. Now, Martin, when you have, and I know the answer to this because I've been paddling with you in the spring, but your waterproof backpack, is it loose in the canoe for you to be able to retrieve it in the water, or is it tied off to the canoe?
No, it's not tethered. It is it's loose in the canoe so that I can grab it, and I have a carabiner on it so that I can tether it to myself, because I don't want to be swimming with one arm holding this thing. I have to be able to clip it to my PFD. So yes, I have a waterproof roll top backpack, so it will float. So it'll actually offer me some added flotation, and it contains dry clothes to change into, and some redundancy with respect to fire lighting and stuff like that, along with what's in my ditch kit, which is an item that contains some crucial survival items. and that's usually in a fanny pack right on my person. It's always on me. I don't have to retrieve that. If I go in the water, it's already on me. But I want my roll top pack that has my dry clothes to be loose. It can't be tethered to the canoe. I mean, what if it's windy and the canoe gets blown off or something like that, and I can't reach it or something like that? I really have only precious minutes to get to shore, if that, right? You brought up going down the Big East River. That's another consideration, a huge consideration, a difference between summer tripping and spring tripping. Depending on what river you're on, moving water, the water volume can be extraordinary.
Yeah.
Not just extraordinarily high, which might make it safer over rapids because you're going to cruise over the rocks and things like that. But the speed with which you're moving is considerable. And if there are like these tight bends, you get swept to the outside if you don't know how to control your canoe. And it's very counterintuitive, the kind of strokes that you have to do and how you have to angle your boat so as not to get swept to the outer bank. And next thing you know, you're in a sweeper, a fallen tree, or a strainer that's in the water, and you're getting strained against it. And lots of people drown that way all the time.
That may not have been there season previous, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
These things come down in the spring. They come down in the winter, and they come down in the spring. And so there can be obstacles right around a bend that you don't know is there, right? So you can be, and you're moving, you're at speed now because the water is high and fast. It's carrying you along. You come around a bend, you think the coast is clear because you've done it maybe several times before in the summer, and you come around the bend and suddenly there's an obstacle there, and you cannot back paddle against that current unless you are a really strong paddler and the current will permit that. But very often that's not the case. So that's another huge consideration, is the volume of water and the speed at which it will carry you and what it will do. And if you don't know how to paddle in current, you're not going to be able to thread the line that you think you can. Everyone thinks that they can. I remember when I was learning to paddle, and I'd been paddling on flat water for a while, and I ended up on a river with considerable current, and I was just getting swept from one outer bank to the other outer bank every turn that I made. And everything I did, every intuition I had about how to do it was wrong. It was only when I went back and reread what I had already read in Bill Mason's book about how to angle your boat and how to use backwater techniques to get yourself to move laterally towards an inner bank, right? So there's some skill and technique there. So that's a huge factor, is the flow rate of the water. And Shane Brazo asked, what do I usually have in my ditch kit? There's the expense of shameless self-promotion. I have a YouTube video on my YouTube channel. It's an unmonetized channel. I don't make any money off it, but I detail what's in my ditch kit, everything, in all kinds of detail. So that's all there if anyone's interested. But I mean, it's the essential survival items, the big five, the 5 C's and things like that, including a whistle and combustion devices and stuff like that, alternate shelter and things like that. So that's all in my ditch kit. It all fits in a very small fanny pack and stays on my person and never comes off. If I'm in the water, that thing is on me. If I'm on a portage, that thing is on me. It only comes off briefly when I'm in camp because I want to sit down. I don't want that fanny pack there. Don't hang it nearby. But even if I go off to poop in the woods, it comes with me. So that's my lifeline. That's got everything I need to get through a couple of bad nights in the woods. And have to have that on the water.
What type of fire sources do you keep in that ditch kit? Because there's a number of different good things that would really work even in wet conditions, right?
Yeah. So I mean, the classic things that people like to bring are things like a ferro rod and stuff like that, which I like to use, and various fire starters. They can be natural, or they can be synthetic stuff. They can be like dryer lint, or they could be cotton pads soaked in wax and lighter fluid and stuff like that. That's the kind of thing I use actually as a kind of surefire way of starting a fire. But waterproof matches are great. And a lighter is great. And the best thing about a lighter is that although if it gets wet, it might be hard to use. It is typically easy to use when your hands are cold. Matches are really hard to use when your hands are cold. Right, a lighter is actually easier to use. Right, you can hold it with you can light a lighter with your mittens on. Right, but it's hard to do that with matches. And if you're going to get matches, I would invest in storm-proof matches. UCO, UCO, the company UCO, they make candles and candle lanterns. They make a storm-proof match that's really incredible. It's more like a miniature road flare. It's It's about 2 or 3 inches long. It's just covered in sulfur and magnesium and every pyrotechnic chemical you can imagine. And you can light. I'm not exaggerating now. You can light that and dip it in a glass of water and hold it there for a count of 5. Take it out, and that chemical reaction keeps going, and it'll ignite again, soaking wet. That's what you want in your ditch kit, something like that. And then, but redundancy, have a lighter as well, because that's easier to light. And a ferro rod is great, but if you're shivering and your hands are, turning blue and white and stuff like that, then, a ferro rod is not the way to go. You're trying to ignite sparks, and it's just too hard. But you have to not just have a combustion device, you have to have a starter, something that will allow you to grow a fire. So, a chemical fire starter or something like that is a great thing to have. Because you don't want to have to keep trying to relight this thing, right? You want something that will keep burning. You can walk away and go get tinder and build up your fire and get kindling and keep building it up. And you want it to burn for several minutes. So that would be what's in the combustion part of my ditch kit would be multiple ways of starting a fire and multiple ways of sustaining a fire.
I was talking with Randy Greenall at the camping or at the canoe symposium this past weekend. He told me he carries a flare with him because they'll work when wet as well, right?
Yeah, they'll work. Yeah, and of course, a flare is a flare, right? It's that's a surefire way to start a fire, and it's a fantastic signaling device. If you're in trouble and someone's going by, or there's a plane going by, and you get a flare going, and that could be a lifesaver. So yeah, sure.
So in preparing then for an ice out trip or an early spring trip, we'll just call them spring trips for lack of it. Well, just to keep it simple. But clothing, let's get into the clothing thing. I mentioned earlier that because it's going to be cooler on the water, you're probably going to be wearing different layers, obviously, than you're going to be wearing in the summertime. How do you regulate that? Now this could go towards Martin too, because I remember his walking the line of cold speech that he gave one time there for winter camping and like pulling stuff and working. And Nate, that because you just got off and experienced yourself. But what how should people be dressing when it comes to paddling, and then the difference in clothing gear that you're going to wear when you get to, say, for instance, your camp, because you're not going to wear the same things on the water that you wore in camp. I'll let you take this one, Nate.
Well, you want to think about it. I think that Martin's saying is riding the cool edge.
That's
yeah. But yeah, essentially you want to sort of approach it like you would a long fall hike or like a cold weather hike, right? So when you're hiking, when you're paddling, when you're portaging, you're warm, right? Because you're being active. When you're stopping for a break, when you're stopping to eat, when you're stopping for any reason, your body is rapidly cooling down. And so that's putting it really simply, but what you really want to make sure you have is something to put on you to keep warm when your body is really cooling down. I want to use layers while I'm paddling that are able to breathe and wick moisture away from me as my body is generating that vapor, right? So as I'm stopping, if my body's cooling down, that sweat isn't sitting on my skin and making me cold. And then when I get to camp, essentially as soon as I've stopped the hustle and bustle of setting up a tent and things like that, when you're there enjoying the view and sort of just tinkering around at camp, I'll usually bring like a full-on puffy coat, right? I will pack a full-on puffy coat that goes on. If it's a nice spring day with a bit of a breeze, any layer that I've had on that is sweaty or whatever, that gets hung out to dry, and I put a spare set of layers on, right? So because the last thing you want is to stop moving and whatever you're wearing starts to cool down and you're cooling down. So what's nice is that puffy piece will warm you up or keep you warm pretty simply, but you also want to make sure that you've got a way to dry out those layers that you've made wet. And so you want those spare layers with you. It's sort of like the premise of winter camping, right? Part of the whole reason that people use a hot tent over multi-day trips is to be able to actually dry out your gear, because if you are in a cold tent and with no real heat source inside, then you're not going to have much luck in drying that wet, soggy stuff out, and it's not going to be warm or dry when you go to put it back on. So, and as Martin has explained before, it's extremely difficult to just sort of dry something out over a line that's hanging over a campfire of some sort, right? It's a little tricky. It takes some time. So if you're just out for a spring trip, you want to make sure that you've at least got something spare to put on right away. And then strategically dry out what you need to, so that when the layers you've got on get wet again, your other ones are ready to go. So lots of warm layers, spare layers, and a good puffy piece to be able to throw on just to keep that core temp nice and warm.
Sure. And what about sort of on the other end of the spectrum? Springtime usually brings a lot of rains. You know what I mean? You could be out there paddling, and before you know it, you're getting dumped on rain, sleet, even wet snow. Keeping your rain gear handy is, I guess, paramount as well, right? When it comes to being in the backcountry, don't forget that at home.
Well, we've all had the experience of the forecast turning horribly wrong, right? So there is no perfect forecast. You can have 6 different apps on your phone, and the weather will never be, the weather will never be what it should be according to your forecast in May or June or April. So be prepared for all the weather, right? So unfortunately, that means usually you might have to pack a little heavier than you would for a clear week in July. But yeah, you're gonna want rain pants. You're gonna want a hard shell, something waterproof and breathable, and that's gonna be super, super important because something like a poncho is nice, but you're not gonna be able to paddle very well in something like a poncho. If you're on a trip and you've obviously got a day of paddling ahead of you in drizzle. Something like one of those plastic ponchos or something, it's just not going to cut it. The other thing about those, of course, is they're not breathable, right? So you're doing the double whammy of the cold rain driving down on you and your body generating vapor because you're paddling or portaging or whatever, and then your sweat having absolutely nowhere to go other than back onto your skin. So and I'm sure most of the people here in the show know, but it's absolutely worth it to invest in a good rain shell that's waterproof, breathable, with venting.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing too is the way you pack your clothing, right? I know when I canoe in the summertime or in the more fair weather, it's all my clothing seems to end up in the bottom of my pack, right? Except for the raincoat, which is the rain gear, which is always handy. And now I keep that in a separate bag, even more handy, especially since I did my presentation here at the Outdoor Adventure Show this year on that. But when you're in a spring camping trip, you want to make sure that your clothing is accessible, or even some sort of a blanket or something is accessible, so that if you do need it quick, it's near the top of the pack, not at the bottom. Leave the pots and pans in the bottom, you know what I mean? But keep the clothing up near the top where you're going to have a quicker, more easy access to it. What are some of your favorite things that you'd want to wear, Martin, in the cool weather?
I'm going to echo what Nate said about a good quality rain gear set. So a hard shell outer with pit zips that vent. One of the things that happens when you're paddling is your arms are raised and you're paddling, right? If you don't have something that cinches at the cuffs, water runs down to your cuffs and it just goes all the way down and you get soaked, right? You have to have something that cinches around the neck. You want to have something that has a sort of a peak visor if it's got a wire in it, so that you can form it into a stiff visor. That's great. Or wear a cap underneath it that keeps the rain off your face and keeps that hood in its position, so that in driving rain you don't have water going in, past your face and down your neck. And it should have a drop cord at the bottom, so that you can loosen it, so that when you're sitting, it can be kind of big and balloony. Make sure your rain gear is oversized. I say this all the time to people. Make sure your rain gear is oversized, because if it's tight on you, then the moisture that's building up inside from your sweat doesn't get expressed. But when it's big and balloony and you're moving and you're paddling, right, that's acting like a bellows, right, and it's pushing all that moist air out of you, out of the rain gear, and it really helps. And it comes out the pit zips and stuff like that. And your cuffs have to be cinched, so there's nothing coming out your cuffs, and things around your neck have to be fairly closed, not all the way usually, but fairly closed. Otherwise, rain will get in there if it's a hard rain. And then you have to have good rain pants, and they can't be the cheap, K-Ways or something like that. They got to be good rain pants. If they have pockets, it can't be the kind of pocket that opens up that goes right inside into your inner pants. Like a lot of rain pants just have a slit as a pocket, so you can reach your hand in and get into your actual pant pocket. You don't want that because rain will absolutely get in there and soak your pants. So you want proper rain pants, a good hard shell rain pant. The other thing is footwear. So I've changed my mind about this. So like, for a long time, I was that guy that said, "What's the point of having sort of waterproof, foot gear and stuff like that? It's all going to get wet. It's all going to get soaked." And then I started, spring camping, and then it's a completely different thing because it's too darn cold, right? So I've invested in Sealskin's waterproof socks, and that has been a huge game changer for me. And I got the type that have a kind of a rubberized seal around the top, so that even if you put your foot in right up to your knee over the top of the sock, the water does not go down inside the sock. So it's kind of like wearing a rubber boot that water can't get into. That's fantastic. So I can have my regular hikers, and I know that they can get soaked, and I don't care because my foot is encased in a vapor barrier that's going to keep me warm. Now, as soon as I get to camp, right, I'm going to want to change into my camp shoes, right? And I'm going to want to take off those waterproof socks, turn them inside out, let that moisture evaporate and dry off, and get into some warm, dry wool socks or something like that. But on rainy days, let's say it's a rainy day in camp, and my boots are going to get wet. My camp shoes are going to get soaked, and I'm going to get wet socks, and I'm going to have cold feet all day. Well, those waterproof socks come in handy again because they'll keep my feet warm all day. So I'm a convert to waterproof socks. The ones I use are Sealskins. There are other companies that make them. Sealskins is just the word seal, S-E-A-L. Skins, it's all one word, S-K-I-N-Z. And I swear by them. The water does not go in over the top, but you have to buy the special model that has that kind of rubberized seal that clamps around your calf. And so your socks don't slide down and water doesn't get over the top. So that's been a huge thing for me. I don't have a good solution for cold, freezing hands when paddling. But those socks are great. They allow me to wade in and out of the water, and I don't care. It can be soaking wet, pouring rain in camp, walking through wet vegetation, and my feet are warm and dry. And they serve as a vapor barrier to keep you really warm. So I swear by those now. Your feet will stink. You want to get out of them as fast as you can because your feet will stink. And I'm not the type that has stinky feet normally, but they will stink when you're wearing for 2 straight days. And you'll get kind of a pruny foot. So you want to get out of them. You don't want to get trench foot. You want to get out of them as fast as you can, let them dry out. And then I have something to say perhaps later about drying your wet clothes and stuff like that, because there's some things that can make a big difference. And it's more important.
We'll cover that under tips and techniques a little later on, right? On the line of those socks, I do have a pair of waterproof socks. I don't believe they're not Sealskins. I know that, but they don't have the cuff around either. But I find with the waterproof that your feet do perspire in there, and before you know it, your feet feel wet anyways. But they're still warm, like you said.
They're still warm, yeah. So someone asked the same question in the chat, like, how comfortable are you when you've got wet feet? Well, yes, but they're wet by my sweat, and the heat isn't escaping because there's a vapor barrier. Right? And this is actually a way of dressing in winter camping. Basically, you wrap yourself in saran wrap. You put on plastic bags, or bread bags over your feet and stuff like that, or around a sock. You put a bread bag and put your foot in your boot, and that's a great way of keeping your feet warm. And as long as you're moving and active, not just lying around, your foot will be fine. It'll start to feel cold if you're doing nothing. If you're just sitting around camp, your feet, even with the vapor barrier method, will eventually start to cool down. But you just have to move around for a few minutes and your feet will warm right up again. So it's not like having a wet sock in a wet boot where the heat is escaping. The heat can't escape the plastic, right? So you're in a sauna. Your feet are in a sauna when you're wearing waterproof socks. It will get really uncomfortable if you wear it too long. You'll get trench foot, right? You'll get blistering and stuff like that. So you don't want to wear them constantly for days, right? So as soon as I can, I get out of them and I get into dry wool socks, and I get into a dry camp shoe.
Nothing better than that feeling of putting on a pair of dry socks, though, right? You get into camp, especially when it's cool. It's just so,
especially in spring. Yeah, it's a fantastic feeling. Yeah.
Wow. Nate.
Yeah, one more thing to point out about getting your rain shell a little larger is that, of course, you can put it over your PFD, right? And a lot of people forget that. They want to like take their PFD off and put their raincoat on, then put their PFD over their raincoat. And it's going to keep you that much warmer and keep your PFD from getting gross and soggy and needing to be dried out if you're just able to put your shell over your PFD.
Mm-hmm. And going back to what Martin was saying about the billow effect, you want the your rain jacket over the PFD to continue with that. So that's a good size. So if you're an extra large, go with a double or triple XL, right? So
yeah, or just do lots of trying on, because there's hundreds of brands that make really good waterproof breathable shells, and they're all going to fit a little differently. So don't go into it blind online. Do yourself a favor and figure out a way to try some on for a decent fit.
Sure. And please, everybody, if you're out there paddling in the shoulder season, whether you're yay or nay for PFDs, please wear your PFD. Really, especially with the cold water like that, that's truly a life or death situation if you ever should happen to dump. Let's get into planning the trip. What the hardest part of planning a springtime trip is knowing when the ice is coming off the water, right? And trying to nail that. You guys that want to get out there and get the early season trout and and want to be the first ones on the water. How do you predict that? I know Algonquin Outfitters usually has a ice out contest. A couple other outfitters I see right now have ice out contests going on. I thought the ice is almost already out. Is it not? No, not even close. Not even close. Okay.
No.
Well, I live in Southern Ontario, and there hasn't been ice here half the winter. So
right. So that brings up a really good point, and something that I encounter a lot. And it's not a bad thing because it denotes enthusiasm, right? But a large contingency of visitors to northern provincial parks are coming from sort of a different weather area, right? A slightly warmer climate, even year round, even just where you are, Dennis, and Welland there. Yeah, so we're all paddling enthusiasts here, and we're all on social media. And I think one of the best, what I sort of do, and of course everybody knows you can't trust everything you see, read, or hear on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, but if you glean information from enough of those sources and you're able to actually call your provincial park, then you're going to wind up with some good intel. And calling your provincial park that you're interested in going to is probably your best bet that way, because they're going to have that information. And then also there's all kinds of online sources that'll do their best to share legitimate information. Friends of Algonquin Park. There's an Algonquin Park Facebook page that's vetted fairly often, and things like that, because there's a lot of times when people show up and they had just assumed that, north of Huntsville, it's been 17 degrees and sunny all week like it has in London. Mm-hmm. But it hasn't. So, right, yeah. And they can't do anything, right? So now there's less and less of that as people get a little bit more in tune to getting their information sources from trusted places online. But there is still a lot of people that come thinking that the weather should just be exactly like it was the last couple of weeks wherever they live. And usually that means that they're unprepared and then disappointed, and then in a worst case scenario, unsafe. So, sure.
The other thing too is I know over the last few seasons there, excluding the pandemic and stuff, some provincial parks, even though the ice might be out, are not necessarily opening to the public yet, based on safety factors, high water levels and stuff like that. Is that something that Algonquin Park, say for instance, does often, where they control the opening date for canoe season?
Yeah, of course. Most provincial parks are going to be very careful about when they allow backcountry camping again. In fact, right now, I think until at least May 10th, Algonquin Park is closed for backcountry camping, meaning that no, you can't go winter camping. No, you most definitely cannot go backcountry canoe camping. And they will update those dates as the weather permits them to. So usually in Algonquin Park, if you want to go by the Opiongo ice out, it's when a water taxi can make it all the way to the north end of an ice-free Lake Opiongo in the North Arm. That they'll start to consider that as ice out. Kevin Outdoors made a really good point, and it's one that I often forget about, but a lot of people use is updated satellite imagery of where you want to go, especially if you're going to be using Crownland. And that's a fantastic way to get really up-to-date information on how the ice is looking at your destination. If he has a couple websites he recommends, then that'd probably be great information to share.
Sure, yeah. If he has the ability, or if anybody knows of these satellite things, I'd love to know that myself. It sounds like a very very valuable tool to have at your disposal.
Yeah, if someone could post those in the comments. Post those in the comments of the video afterwards, so that people could look that up.
Yeah, by all means. And that way there, you could always reference back, because on the replays, I always have the chat still as part of the replay, so that you can actually follow through what has been going on throughout the show. So when you're doing that, like, do the provincial parks still have the same type of booking rules? You can only book like a certain distance out for that type of thing, or because they don't know exactly when the lakes are going to open up themselves, right? Or
no, so they'll do things like flyovers on a certain basis to be able to get that information, or they'll send staff in to certain places to get that information. But they're the last folks that are going to be in a rush to open an unsafe area. So we'll just put it that way. They're going to wait to make sure that it is safe and passable for anybody that would be using that access point.
Yeah, I'm just seeing in the chat here, Ontario Camp and Couple says, I think that's supposed to be May 12th, called today. Yeah. John M's booked for May the 10th. So, and those are usually it's a safe bet that the park is going to be open. Just there again, talking about Algonquin Park, but it's usually a good bet that around the first or second week of May, the park is going to be open, because especially this year, it hasn't been a really cold winter. So it's not like a few years back when even all the Great Lakes were completely frozen over, right? Remember that was a cold winter. Yeah, that's cool.
Well, Dennis, I don't want to disappoint you, but there's at least there's well over a foot of ice on most of the smaller lakes and lakes inside the park.
Yeah. So, well, you're not disappointing me, but I could go paddle down here in the Welland Canal.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I definitely cannot. But I think what has surprised me about this winter is that even though we haven't got a long stretch of that really deep winter cold, the temperatures have been consistent enough to make a lot of ice, and the forecast, at least up around here, is very, very shoulder season-y. We're not getting into those double-digit daytime temps and overnight positive temps until at least a couple of weeks from now, unfortunately.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about navigation in the springtime. Is there a big difference between navigating a trip in the summer or spring versus the summertime? I know Martin touched on water levels and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, from the standpoint of orienteering, nothing is different that I can think of. You're going to use your map and compass in the same way. You're going to use your satellite imagery in the same way. You're going to use your GPS information in the same way. So I don't see any differences there that I can think of. But I mean, when water levels are high, very often portages can be shorter. Sometimes, right. Hey, there's no portage at all. You can just cruise from here to here, because this thing that is a kind of a trickle in the summer and has to be, carried around or over or through, you can just sail on through paddling. So that can actually be a lot easier. Rivers, I mean, tricky for all the reasons that I described before. So that's all that comes to mind right now. Nate, you might have some more insight into this.
Well, if it's a dam controlled river that you're looking at, there will often be a water flow rate monitor that you can access online through a government website, and that will give you a CFS rating, which, if memory serves me right, I'm sure someone in the chat can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's cubic feet per second in terms of flow. And there's all kinds of ways to judge that as per the river you are wanting to paddle, and that should give you a really good idea of how high that water, or how high that water could be, and how fast it is moving downriver. That'll be something that factors into to your trip. And there is actually one for the Big East River, which is kind of neat. And I will often look at that before I head downriver. And the other nice thing, there's good opportunities for scouting. So if I'm not sure about a body of water, then I'll go and check it out first. So I'll go and look at the put in. I'll go and look at where I'm planning on taking out. I'll do a little bit of driving, just to make sure my basics are covered. And then I'll look at something like the flow rate and see what I'm in for. So
I would also think that, in the sense of planning a trip that is in the springtime, that you might want to, rather than doing a 5-day trip in 5 days, you may want to do a 3-day trip in 5 days to give yourself some allowance for these unknown conditions, because you don't know if the water levels are going to be high. You don't know. You've had a full winter, portages with blowdowns, and stuff like that. There's going to be a lot more obstacles, I'm thinking, in your way. That might hinder your progress somewhat, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. So portages are going to be a mess very often, unless someone's going through and cleaning them up. Unless you're in a park that's like really, really well maintained and managed, or you're on Crown land and there are some local people who are going through with chainsaws and stuff like that. There's going to be blowdown. And this winter, man, there's a lot of blowdown. Like all winter long, everywhere I've gone, I'm seeing more blowdown this winter in the forests than I can recall seeing. And we had a huge storm around here. That big one that hit us all in Ontario around Christmas. There were some big winds in that long extended storm, and there's a lot of blowdown. So I'm expecting to find a lot more blowdown on portages. So Dennis, that's a great point. But another thing that happens in the spring is and more variable winds. So that your suggestion to sort of build in more time, down days where you're not paddling is a good idea, because there will be days where you're windbound, right? It's kind of like in the autumn. In the autumn, you can expect bigger winds, and in the spring you can expect bigger winds, and cold winds, a lot of rain and stuff like that, where you just think, what do I really want to break camp in the pouring rain and wind and go out on the water where I'm going to get blown around and maybe not make much progress in a headwind, or should I just hunker down? Well, there you go. You lost a day right there. So building in some extra time is a great suggestion, and not something I would have thought to do. But that's because I take leisurely trips and I'm on Crown land. I don't actually keep to a schedule, so it's kind of easier for me. But if you're planning a trip, a fixed route, and you need to be on certain days, try to build in some buffer days where you have some latitude where you can hunker down, because there's really nothing. It's kind of nothing that feels more gratifying to me. And this is a weird thing about me, but there's almost nothing I find more gratifying than being stuck on a site windbound where the weather is crappy, which is why I'm staying there. But I got my tarp and I got a fire going and I got everything dialed in, and I'm thinking, hey, everything's fine. It's crappy weather all around me and I'm stuck, but I got everything I need and I'm fine. And I love that feeling. But if you're on a schedule, you are going to feel pressure to move when it's perhaps very imprudent to do so.
Yeah. And it's that pressure that makes you want to try and make up the for lost time, which could then put yourself in danger. Do you get out there in too much chop or too much wind, or do you start risking the fast water or the swollen water? It doesn't even have to be rapids. It could just be very fast water, as you mentioned earlier, carrying you into a sweeper or something like that. So it's definitely not something to be taken lightly, doing an ice out trip or a spring trip, because there seems to be a lot more inherent dangers presenting themselves to you when you're on a trip like this, right?
I can think of one particular danger that has happened to me, and I've talked to a few people about it, and it's happened to them. So this might be actually a more common occurrence than I had realized. But one of the things that has scared me, and someone asked, what's like a scary thing that happened to you? Well, one time I was in the water. I was just out on a day trip. I wasn't canoe tripping. I was just out on a day trip, and I was in my solo boat. Just going back several years now, and it was ice out, and there was still ice on the water, right? But I was a big open channel. It was mostly not ice. But as I was getting to the shore, I was crunching through some thin ice. Okay, now a lot of us do this in the autumn, right? It starts to ice up, and you just use your canoe like an icebreaker, and you hear that crunch, and you're just breaking up this brittle ice. Well, the ice in spring doesn't break up that way. It started thicker and it's thinning, but it has tendency to be denser and heavier. And what happened to me is I was plowing through this stuff, and I was treating like it was a fresh skin of ice, when in fact it was just a decaying, rotting ice. And at one point, the icebreaker stopped breaking the ice, and the bow of my canoe climbed up onto the shelf of the ice. And I found myself unable to stay balanced except in a brace and constantly sculling with my paddle, because now the bow of my boat was up on the ice, not far, like just a foot in. And, but now I don't have control. Like I'm bridged up on this little bit of ice, and it's extremely tippy. Now, how do you get off? It's taking everything I can to just stay upright and not roll, right? It's like someone has picked up the front of my boat and is holding it by the bottom and say, okay, stay upright now. It's tricky. And that's happened to me once, and it scared the Jesus out of me, because I didn't know a good way to get out of it, like to back off safely. Everything that I did was kind of to sort of wrench myself, risk rolling me. And so I had to really go out like a low brace and really scull hard and deep and slowly push my way back. And I was so relieved when I finally got off. Anyway, I spoke to a friend about this one time, and he said, "Oh yeah, that happened to me too." And I said, "Then what happened?" He goes, "I rolled." I felt so lucky. But yeah, don't use your canoe as an icebreaker in the spring the way you will in the autumn, when the ice is just starting to form, and it's that clear, crystally glassy ice. It's completely different, and it will suddenly decide to lift you up, and you're in a bad situation.
Yeah, you know what, and that's something you didn't expect. But you know what, I've seen that happen to people even without ice. I've seen it happen where they get your partner will pull up, and they'll just get the canoe up just enough on shore on a rock.
Oh yeah, the bridge.
You lose that pivot point, and before you know it, you're in the back, and you're not expecting the damn thing to do this. Whoop, over you go, right? So
yeah. But that's okay, because you're usually at the shore, so you're in like 3 feet of water or 2 feet of water,
and it's usually warmer, right?
And it's warmer, yeah. But when you're in killing cold ice water conditions, and you might be far from the shore, right? Which is what happened to me, and I was like, oh, what am I going to do? So yeah, it's a scary moment.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too, you need to remember is that even though the waterway you might be paddling on is clear, the shorelines will still have collected ice on them, right? So you might not be able to step out onto dry ground or a bit of sand or something. You might have to deal with stepping out onto a little bit of ice before you get to that takeout point at your site or the portage. Because we all know there's those last bits of ice that sort of cling to the shoreline, and that the rest of it's probably going to be, something like rocks overnight will become kind of frosty and chilly and very slippery, right? So things to consider, and you just need to sort of be prepared for, when Martin talks about waterproof socks, there's a prime example of you having to probably dip your feet in a little bit more than you might like to get your boat out of the water. Especially your early spring after just after ice out, there's going to be some ice hanging onto the shoreline.
Yeah, for sure. Just reading over here in the chat there, and John M posted a question. I think he's looking at my my sheet down here, and so I'll just bring this question right up here. What are some of the pros to an early spring trip? Who wants to take that? Great trout fishing, right?
Yeah, well, I'm not much of an angler, so I'm allergic to fish, so I can't eat my catch. So when I fish, it's for somebody else to eat. So I can't speak to the whole trout thing that people love to do. No opinion there. But I mean, what I love about it is like I've had a hankering to go canoe camping, so I'm finally going to satisfy that urge that and satiate some of that spring fever that that's been building up inside me. So I mean, that's the pro. The pro is finally getting out there. But then the other thing is that in early spring the woods are clear. There's not a lot of foliage yet. There's a bit of vegetation coming in, maybe, and not even an early ice out, right? But everything is budding and it's just starting to green out, and it's really beautiful. All the warblers are back, right? The insectivores are back and buzzing around. And so it's a great time if you're into wildlife and birding, especially, to see them, because the canopy is not filled up with leaves, right? So you can see birds that are like all normally hanging around in the crown of trees. You can now see them and spy them. You're going to see migratory birds, birds that are coming back that were gone. And I mean, that's a beautiful thing. And I just like the open sight lines. The woods look open and clear because they're mostly leafless. And when there is any greenery, it's that light, bright, fresh spring green, that moegi color. It's a Japanese word for spring green. That moegi color is beautiful. I love that. So that's another thing that I like about spring camping. And of course, the biggest thing of all, I shouldn't have to say this, there's no bugs yet. There's no bugs. You don't have to bring your bug suit. You don't have to bring bug dope. You don't have to have your tied up to the neck and long sleeves and long pants. If it's actually warm enough to untuck your pants out of your socks, you don't have to worry about black flies. Oh, it's glorious.
Yeah.
So that's a great thing. That's one of the real pros. And that window of between ice out and when the black flies start is not long, right? So you really want to go early because you extend that beautiful period of buglessness, that little paradise where it's still warm enough to camp, not quite warm enough to swim, in my opinion. But you can just walk around shirtless in the sun, and it's just fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, well, you, Nate, what do you like about spring paddling?
Yeah, I love just being able to get back out there and being able to go to bed and wake up without having to worry about the stove.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's nice. Jonathan from Lost Lakes is on here, and he pointed out one of my favorite sounds to go to sleep to is spring peepers. Man, I love that. Love it. And I know some people find spring peepers like annoying as heck, and especially when you mix in the bullfrogs. But you know what? For me, it's just it's music to fall asleep to. I love it. So
I was gonna say it's better than any music I've ever heard on any radio station, right?
Yeah.
No,
and you do find like there's less people out there, so you might not see anybody. The people you do see out there are often in the same sort of excited spring mood that you are to be out there. So there's a lot of positivity, a lot of excitement for the season ahead. Martin did mention the sight lines. I love cruising along a shoreline, being able to see up into places that you would normally not be able to see because of the foliage being grown in. So you do get a totally different sort of view than you would normally in July or August, and that's pretty cool too. So yeah, those are a couple of my favorite things for sure.
I like the remoteness part. I like the fact that you're probably not going to see as many people out there as you would normally, any other warm season type of thing, right? Yeah. So your chances are less. And like I said, the fishing is usually really good too. So it's I know Martin doesn't fish, but some of us do. So that's even though I've never caught myself a speckled trout yet. So that's got to happen this year. Yeah. Somebody was asking here, and I'm just going to pull the question up here because I thought it interesting. Do you find bears more aggressive in the spring compared to the fall? Has anybody ever had an experience with a bear early spring after they're coming out of hibernation?
I have not. No. I mean, when blueberry season hits, I see a lot of bears, obviously, because they're feeding on blueberries, and that's much later. So
yeah. Yeah, my only experience with a bear was a couple of years ago when I did do that Smoke Lake to Bonashare up in Algonquin. I got on this one campsite, and if you watch my YouTube video on it, the whole campsite, it looked like a bear exploded. It unplugged, man. And it was like everywhere. It's like if you've seen it, you'd like. I thought it was something growing out of the ground. There was so much bear shit all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Well,
a winter's worth of it.
Yeah, and I asked, I put it out there, like, what is this? Like, because I didn't identify it as bear. some old hunter friend of mine told me, he says, that there was a bear unplugging.
Well, Dennis, at least you now have an answer to the age-old question, right?
Yeah, he does in the woods, that's for sure. Or at least all over this campsite. So that was pretty nasty.
You know what? It's something that's often, because in the spring I'm often solo and I'm mostly on Crown land, and of course, like a hungry bear just out of hibernation. It's definitely in the back of my head, so I'm careful with my food and what, if anything, I bring into my tent with me, etc. But I've never had, knock on wood, I've never had an incident where a bear's been after my food. And partly people need to remember too that if you're a little bit more adventurous and do some crown land camping, you're usually using campsites that are a little less prone to be habituated by bears that are used to coming there for food, right? So, a bear in a very busy route along Algonquin Park might be used to sort of cruising around between certain campsites where it's found food there before, right? But if you're at a crown land spot where maybe no one's been for a couple of years sometimes, then you're far less likely to have a bear come cruising by just out of habit, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that to take into consideration as well. And I know crown land varies wildly depending on where you are and how you're accessing it, but a lot of the campsites I go to are used very, very infrequently, and so I'm a little less worried about a bear kind of getting used to cruising by that campsite to possibly find food.
Yeah. Wildlife sightings, do you think it's a little more often or a little more frequent in the springtime?
Yeah. Not in my experience, except for birds. Birding is amazing. So I'm not a huge birder or anything like that, but just the variety, you see more species that you would not see or would not see with any regularity or ease in the spring. So that's a big one for me. And of course, if you're into plant identification and wild edibles and stuff like that, it's a really good time to learn because the plants come up sequentially, right? In a succession, right? They don't just pop up whenever. They come out at a certain time of year. So the first thing that you're going to see is going to be something like trout lily or spring beauty, those flowers. And then you're going to see wild leeks, and then you're going to see trilliums and stuff like that. So there's a kind of succession to the way the plants come out, an orderly succession of emergence. And it's a good way to learn how to identify plants because you're not overwhelmed by this variety, this botanical garden of different species around you. There's very few plants emerging. So, it's very easy with an app or a book, field guide or something like that to identify, what is this? It's not like there's 50 species competing for your attention and all look alike or something like that. It's really, really easy that way. And it's the same thing with birding, actually. What you tend to see a lot of at first are a lot of the warblers. And they're not hidden by the canopy. So they're much more visible. So yeah, for that, it's great. With respect to mammals and stuff like that, I can't report that I had seen many more of them at that time of year than later. If anything, I probably see more of them in the autumn.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, you know what, fellas? Let's take a quick little commercial break here, and great opportunity to fill up a drink or get rid of one. I did post the link in the chat there if anybody wants to pop on and ask us a quick question. And after the break there, we'll get into talking about maybe meal planning for spring trips, see how that might differ. Maybe a little more on clothing, a little more safety, and maybe some pointers on bringing a pet with you into the backcountry. So we'll take care of that right after this little commercial break.
There's nothing like being out there. For over 50 years, we've been connecting people with nature By building classic Canadian canoe designs using the best materials available, we built a reputation on durable, dependable canoes that allow you to focus on what's important, whether that's unplugging in remote wilderness, spending quality time with your favorite people, or nailing the perfect line. Visit novacraft.com to find the perfect canoe for you and locate your nearest authorized dealer.
Tonight's episode of Canoehounds Outdoor Adventure Show is brought to you by OTG Meals, fresh, freeze-dried, small batch meals made for people on the go. Algonquin Outfitters, with 4 key locations in and around Algonquin Park to serve your backcountry needs. Kid Products, stick stoves and reflector ovens proudly made in Canada. And Novacraft Canoes, connecting you with nature in Canadian-made canoes since 1970. And welcome back to the second half of Canoehounds Outdoor Adventure Show, the portion of the show I like to call Overtime. You know what? Hopefully everybody's enjoying tonight's show and garnering a little bit of information and experience. You know what? I did post a link there if anybody wants to join us on panel here for a brief question or two, or even still, if you want to post your questions over there, please feel free to do so, and we will get to them. I have started a bunch of questions that we will bring up here towards the end of the show, just sort of as a rapid fire question answer thing. And we'll try to wrap the show up by 9 o'clock tonight, because I know one of our guests does have a commitment after the show tonight. So we will take care of that. So with that being said, let's bring our guests back up here on the panel. We have Martin and we have Nate, and welcome back, fellas. Hopefully you had a good break here. Everybody runs to the bathroom, right? Okay, so I had mentioned there I wanted to talk about meal planning and stuff like that for a trip. But how would that differ from any other season? Are we going to be needing more calories out there with this cooler weather?
Definitely. Now I don't have anything that I do differently, because I'm on a weird diet, right? I'm on this ketogenic diet and I'm sort of carnivore adjacent. So my diet consists ordinarily about 70% dietary fat, animal fat, and some vegetable fat, and then a bit of protein and even less carbohydrate. So when I'm out there, I got everything I need in the way of calories, of calorie dense food. So I don't have to bring more food, and I don't have to sort of vary my diet. I've got more than enough. So I don't have to change anything. So I'm just dehydrating a bunch of stuff right now. But I don't do anything differently in my case. So I'm not the best person to ask. But in the past, I used to just bring, a lot more pasta.
Right. How about you, Nate? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, same. I just bring more calories, more proteins, more carbs, because when your body's working to stay warm, it's burning more, and your food, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks needs to reflect that. And there's sort of like a loose philosophy around, I was going to get to it a little bit later, but around the spring sort of camping I do. I don't get overly ambitious about the trip I do, even though I'm super, super excited for paddling season. And I kind of, I tether myself to the fact that I'm not going to get too ambitious, because I'm basically going to make sure that I can pack both gear and food to be comfortably warm and fed, even though it might be a little bit more than I would like to carry than, of course, in somewhere like July and August. So if you can kind of work with the fact that you're going to need to bring a little bit more in order for yourself to be warm, safe, comfortable, and well fed, then you should temper your plans accordingly, and you will have a happy time.
Yeah, and as somebody alluded to there, it's a great time to have fresh steak every night, because the cooler temperatures through the day and throughout the evening makes it easier to store fresh foods if you're willing to carry the weight of the fresh foods, right?
Yeah, and I'm not going out there to do some sort of survival challenge or 5 things only in a pack minus 11 at night. That's just not why I go camping. And so, if I'm going to go out there for a nice spring starter, it might be a couple nights, and it might be like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to make sure that it's not a crazy length of paddle, so I'm not worried about being somewhere by the time it starts getting dark, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to make sure that I've got the food that I'm going to need and that I'm going to enjoy making and eating. And I'm going to make sure that I'm warm and cozy, whether I'm sitting around the campfire or I'm tucking myself in at night. And that might mean my canoe might sail a little lower in the water because of that. But I also have peace of mind that I'm going to be safe, warm, and comfortable, and enjoying myself for my first time out for the year.
Mm-hmm. I thought of one thing that I do differently that I had really given consideration to before, and that is I bring more tea and I bring more coffee, especially decaf. So I only want to bring so much caffeine, so regular coffee. I bring a certain amount, and that doesn't change much. But I want to be drinking more hot beverages because I just like having a hot beverage, right? When it's cold and damp and stuff like that. You know, you want to be sitting around the fire. Well, why not have water boiling, and why not, drink a hot beverage? So, if you like to bring rum, hot rum is a great thing. But if you're a tea drinker, herbal or black teas or whatever, bring more of it because you're going to be drinking more of it. You're going to want to drink more hot water because if you drink cold water or cold beverages of any kind, you have to expend calories to bring that up to body temperature. Whereas if it's pre-warmed, you're actually introducing heat into your system and not robbing yourself of any heat. So I definitely bring, more tea bags and things like that. And, sometimes I'll go, depending on, what kind of tree species are around me, I'll make a pine needle tea and stuff like that. Get a big, vitamin C fix that way. But definitely more hot beverages.
Yeah. I know a lot of people will bring even in substitute of coffee or tea, because of the caffeine and stuff like that, is broths, different types of broth, those, what are those packets called?
Bovril or OXO cubes and things like that?
Like OXO cubes, or even though they're very high in sodium, cup of noodles or like Mr. Noodle packets, because you're getting a bit of food in there. You're getting kind of crappy calories, but it's a nice hot thing to put into the belly to keep you warm and hydrated, right? And what have you got there? Moose bone broth.
This is dehydrated moose bone broth. So I make bone broth, and you can just make a kind of broth soup. So this is just dehydrated. It looks like potato chips in here. It's just very light, dry stuff. And it's just bone broth that I've dehydrated down to a crisp. Mm-hmm. But it's full of collagen. It's full of salt. It's full of fat. It's full of nutrients of all kinds. And I just throw a few flakes of this stuff in in a cup of water, and I've got this nice, greasy, fatty, rich, nutrient, calorie dense drink. And you can flavor it with anything you want. But I mean, it just tastes like broth. It's just bone broth. But you don't have to bring OXO cubes, which have a tendency to be overly salted and hard to drink on their own. They're good for seasoning of food. This is actual bone broth. It's not overly salted at all. So I make my own bone broth, or you can just make bone broth at home and get it so that it's not overly salted. You water it down to a level that you like, and then you can concentrate it and dehydrate it. And then when you rehydrate it with the equivalent volume of water, it's not going to be overly salty. It won't be predominantly a salt taste, which is what you usually find if you get like a chicken stock, a dried chicken stock, or bone broth or something like that. It's usually just pure salt in your mouth.
Yeah, I find it easier too in the spring to bring a lot of dehydrated water. It carries light, it's it doesn't take up much space in your pack. Yeah, and talking of water, actually, I think it was Evan Lefebvre mentioned on their electrolytes. How important is it to stay hydrated while you're out there? When it's cooler out, you have a tendency, just like winter camping, you have a tendency not to intake much water. Right, even though you're perspiring a lot and you're giving off a lot of water vapor, how important is it, obviously, to stay hydrated out there, right?
Well, I have this thing, this is a 4-part recipe for staying warm in the cold for winter camping when I teach winter camping, and you need 4 things. You need to be insulated against the cold. You need to be fed. You need to be rested. That is to say, you have to sleep. And you have to be hydrated. If you are dehydrated, your body's capacity to thermoregulate is mightily impaired. And that's one of the things that can actually lead to hypothermia is dehydration. You just simply cannot get your body to to adjust to burn calories when it should and not when it shouldn't. So yeah, it's very important to stay hydrated. And one of the things I have in my ditch kit, oddly enough, is one of those tiny little Ziploc bags, one of those little tiny ones, filled with salt, just a mixture of salt, ordinary table salt, potassium, magnesium salt, and just a whole bunch of salts. I mean, in a pinch, dissolve that some in water, or even just pop it into your mouth if you're feeling really weak and lightheaded. I use that. Now, the bone broth that I use kind of sort of negates all of that, or rather obviates the need for those things. But yeah, it's important that you be hydrated. And one of the things that people don't appreciate is that you will not feel hot when it's cold, even when you're exerting yourself. But your body is always perspiring. You perspire more when it's hot because your body is using perspiration for evaporative cooling to cool you. But you are always sweating, right? And like people don't realize it, but your hands are sweating all the time. Your hands have as many sweat glands as your feet, right? And I mean, these are all just paws, right? And so we don't notice it because our hands are bare. We notice that our feet get wet when we're exerting ourselves, right? But a lot of the times we're not doing much with our feet, but we're doing a lot with our hands. Well, you're sweating constantly. And it's just coming off you all day long. And the fact that it's cold just means you're less likely to recognize that you're losing moisture and not appreciate it. So that's another reason to, like, every time there's a fire going, have a pot of water going on your twig stove, on your on whatever kind of stove you're using, or over the campfire. Have water on the boil so that you can drink hot liquids.
The other thing I did on my last trip, and I've done it before, that works for me. I have a fairly sort of regimented intake of water where I'll just have sort of a water intake goal in the back of my head and just sort of keep at it. So I'm sort of constantly hydrating. But one thing that can help, especially because purified water or boiled water often doesn't taste all that great, is electrolyte replacement tabs. And those are super handy. They're super easy to use, and they are very effective in my experience.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
They're compact. They're inexpensive. Yeah.
And don't forget, people, if you're feeling thirsty out there, then you're already becoming dehydrated. So you want to drink even when you're not feeling thirsty. Just keep that keep the water flowing through your system for sure. We do have a guest in the basement here. I think I'd like to bring him up here and see what we got for a question. Let's welcome Landon to the chat. How you doing there, Landon?
Hey.
Got a question for the boys?
Yeah, I was wondering if there's any tips for gathering firewood in the spring.
There you go. Who wants to take that one?
Okay, so Nate, why don't you take this one? I feel like I've done a lot of talking. I have some.
Well, Martin, most of what I learned from you. But anyways, I'll give it a shot. So you want to look for, of course, the easiest wood to work with is going to be dry, right? So if you're using a tool like a saw, you want to be able to learn how to look for wood that is standing and dead, right? So we want to look for usually a tree that's manageable with a saw, so about the thickness of your wrist or bigger, and look for the signs that you'll be able to tell if that tree you're looking at is dead, because that's going to be nice dry wood to work with once you've cut it down and processed it into smaller pieces, and things like dead branches that have been covered up by other branches that are dry to the touch. Those are great to use, and of course you always want to start small and then go bigger, right? So you want to be able to prep a bundle of twigs that's about the size of a pencil lead, and another bundle of twigs that are the size of a pencil. And then what's the next one? About the size of your wrist, right, Martin?
Yeah, well, I do wood splits. So I'd start with like really fine twigs that, as you said, are pencil lead thickness, like really thin, really fine stuff, and usually conifers, like stuff from pines and spruces and balsam firs and things like that. Those are high resin content woods, and so they ignite and combust faster and hotter in a short period of time. And then the next thing that you're going to use up from that will be the pencil thickness twigs of the same species, conifers whenever you can. And then you want to sort of move into your hardwoods if hardwood is available. And then what you do, though, is you take something, let's say the size of a wrist, and you'll baton it down into splits. So you're not trying to burn something the size of your wrist or even smaller than that whole. You want to split it. So you use a knife and another piece of wood to baton through it. So learn how to baton. If you don't know how, look it up in videos or read up about it. But batoning is a great thing, because split wood catches faster and more easily than wood in the round. So as Nate said, look for stuff that's standing, dry, dead wood. You want it off the ground. Anything that's horizontal is probably going to have a lot of moisture, a lot of snow, and a lot of ice melting on it, and it could drink in a lot of moisture. If it's standing and vertical, it's going to dry out faster and will never have accumulated as much moisture on its surface and drunk it in. Because dry wood drinks is hydrophilic. It loves water and it'll drink it in. But if it's vertical, it will not have absorbed much, and if it's had time to dry, it'll express out its moisture. So look for things that don't have bark too. Bark needs moisture. So if you can find standing dead wood that's missing bark, well, that's good, because it will have lost a lot of its moisture during the winter. It will have just literally sublimated right out of it, and it'll probably be still very dry in the spring. And now spring, there's a lot of rain, but surface moisture is not a problem. When it's raining and it's standing dead, the water will not get absorbed deep into the wood. So if you split it, and you're not trying to burn the outside, which is the wettest part, you're splitting it. When you put it in your fire, the driest part can ignite. And then, and if there isn't tons of dry wood, then use the driest wood you can find to start your fire. But then you can manage the remaining damper wood or bigger pieces of wood by just putting them around the fire, close by the fire, leaning, let's say you have a ring of rocks or something like that, and lean it right on it, and let that moisture of the fire dry your firewood. I see people do this all the time. They go out and they get whatever firewood they need for their fire, and they'll have extra firewood lying around, but it's 4 feet away. It's under the tarp, so it's not getting wet in the rain, but it's 4 feet away from the fire. Get it closer to the fire and let it get dry. And not only does it dry, but it gets pre-warmed, right? So it's pre-warmed so that when you want to put it in the fire finally, it's already closer to its kindling point, and so will ignite and combust faster. So those are some little tips there.
Yeah. Now, a couple things I'd like to add, though, is identifying wood. If you're talking about identifying standing wood, sometimes it's hard to identify because not all trees start budding right away. And what might look like a dead tree might not be a dead tree, in fact, right? But if you look for the telltale signs, as Martin mentioned, something that's lost its bark or is losing its bark is usually a good indicator. A lot of times at the base of a lot of coniferous trees, pine, some sort of like pine type of trees, they'll have all their underlying brush might be dead branches as well that you can utilize for firewood. And one of the big tips is if you're at a place that's really a popular place, for instance, Algonquin Park, you can go there and a campsite could look the size of acres because it's been so cleaned out. So you know what, perhaps maybe paddle to another area where there's not a campsite and forage for wood there, or get back farther into the bush. But if you do that, make sure you bring something that's going to get you back to your camp safely, whether it's a GPS or some sort of a beacon or something for safety as far as a whistle's concerned, so that you don't get lost back there, because it can happen really, really quick. All right. Yeah.
Since we're talking a little bit about safety, axes. So people anticipate that they're going to want to burn a lot of firewood. They bring axes. Now, if you don't know how to use an axe, or you think you know, but you haven't been shown or anything like that, maybe reconsider bringing an axe. A saw and a good fixed blade knife that you can baton wood with is usually better. First of all, it's lighter than a big axe. An injury with a knife or a saw will be painful. It's not usually life-threatening, but an injury with an axe is usually really serious. There's usually a hospital visit, right? And that's assuming you can get to one, right? So, I always tell people, avoid axe use unless you absolutely need it. Like winter camping, you almost always need an axe. if you're out, unless you're bringing your firewood or something like that. But even then, it's not always necessary. But if you can avoid bringing an axe just from the standpoint of safety, it's a good idea, especially early in the spring. You're really gung-ho, and a lot of people do solo trips in the spring because they can't get anyone else to come with them at that time of year because it's still too cold. So they go alone. And if you're wielding an axe and you don't even have to be unskilled, you can just get unlucky. And so I always caution people about axe use. It's better to be wielding an axe if there's someone around to help you in case something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Landon, who you got with you there? I see the odd person. Hey,
all right.
How you doing?
Good. You?
Good.
He's going. If we lose you, the battery's dying. Dad didn't plan well here, but Landon's going on his first spring backcountry canoe trip. I've got May 22nd. So Monday night of the long weekend. So
okay.
Well, you can expect bugs May 22nd, though. The black flies will be out by then.
Yeah.
Usually second week, first week or two, the black flies are out around here anyway. I'm in Muskoka. It depends where you are, of course.
Yeah,
but
got the bug jackets ready.
Yeah. So first 2 weeks of May, usually the black flies are out, but they're not biting. They're just swarming. The males are waiting for the females, or sort of hungrily cruising for females. But it's the females that bite. So you can be swarmed by males, but they're not going to bite you because they don't bite you. It's only the females, but by the third week of May, the second half of May, then they're out and they're biting, and they can be out in force depending on how early or late the season is. So,
cool. Any other questions, Landon?
No, that's it.
Well, you have yourself a great time in your first spring camping trip. That should be a really good time. Make lots of memories. Good stuff. Thanks for popping on, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Cheers. I love seeing people come up here and ask questions. It makes it all worthwhile, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was a good question too.
Yeah, it was
because fire is really much more important in the fall and in the spring. And it's deceptively hard to find dry wood in the spring because everything is just thawed out. It's in early spring, especially, everything has been sitting under a blanket of snow that has turned into ice, right? And so the wood can be really more saturated than you think. And I see people, or I see evidence of it mostly on Facebook posts and stuff like that, and people lamenting how hard it is to find dry wood. But they're getting stuff that's on the ground. They're getting stuff that's full of, covered in bark and stuff like that. So it is dead, but it's covered in bark. So it's retained a lot of moisture, and it hasn't vented out any of the moisture that's accumulated in the spring thaw. So it's a really good question.
Another thing I really like doing, and this isn't a huge plug for one of my sponsors, Kid Products, but they have a twig stove, and you know what? Sometimes just a fire from a twig stove, whatever brand it might be, is such a warming little thing. We did a trip last year where it rained the whole time that we were out there, and we were burning fat wood because that's the only thing that we can find that was dry, because 3 days of continuous hard rain just had everything saturated, right? But just having that little fire allowed us to cook our cup of soups, have a coffee going, and dirtied our pots all the heck, right? But that little tiny fire just going there, it warms the spirit, it warms the soul, it warms you up, right? And it's a good thing. And along that same lines there, we had a question from Donald Dakota way earlier on in the show asking, do you both set up a rain fly over the fire at your campsites?
Yes. Okay. I'm going to preach here. So I believe in the microclimate. So I teach workshops on stringing tarps and knot use and stuff like that. And one of the most underappreciated uses of a tarp is to create a microclimate that will warm you, that will dry your clothes and keep you warm and keep you comfortable. So, a rain fly, it's called a rain fly. It's a tarp. A rain fly makes people think that it's only about keeping out the rain, but it's not. When you have, let's say that you string your tarp in a kind of A-frame shape, right? So you've got a high peak and then the sides come down a little bit. They don't have to come down to the ground. There's not to be a huge tarp coming all the way down to the ground. But what happens when you have a setup like that and you build a fire underneath it, and it doesn't need to be a big fire, right? It can be a very modest fire. In fact, it has to be a modest fire, otherwise you're going to burn a hole in your tarp. And I'll say a bit more about that. But once you have a small fire, a controlled fire with lots of good coals under there, not only does the smoke of it drive out the mosquitoes, but you will create a microclimate because you'll create a bubble of hot air under the tarp. And hot air is high pressure, and it pushes out all of the dampness. And you will not believe how damp it can be just outside your tarp. And then you set foot in, and then there's all this warm air. And it's because that fire is constantly reheating that air, and it's high pressure, and it's like a, this growing bubble of hot air. It's constantly expressing the moisture. Okay. And it's the difference between sitting outside on a dry day and sitting outside on a damp day. On a damp day, you're just going to get cold. Your clothes slowly absorbs the ambient moisture in the damp air. That won't happen in a microclimate under your tarp. So the way I recommend doing this is, if you can, it depends on wind conditions, but set it up in a kind of A-frame. Set one peak of your tarp higher than the other so that smoke can travel up and out, and keep in mind the direction of the breeze or the wind with respect to that. Build a small fire. You don't need a ton of rocks or anything. You don't need a circle of rocks. In fact, a small, kind of U-shaped pattern of rocks is better than a circle that cuts off air supply in all directions. And build a small controlled fire. Use coniferous branches as tinder and kindling only to start it, because coniferous species of wood, they spark, they pop. That snap, crackle, pop that we all love? Well, that's spitting the embers. That's resin boiling and exploding. So if you burn hardwoods, you will not get that snap, crackle, pop. You'll get very much less of it. And those produce laster, more warming coals. And so you're not going to burn a hole in your tarp. I have had the same sil nylon tarp for, 12, 13, 14 years now. I've lost track. I've never burned so much as a pinhole in it. And I burn fires under my tarps all the time. I've never burned a hole in any tarp except the cheap polyplastic tarps back when I didn't know how to do this. And I would just throw whatever the hell on a fire. And then eventually I'd get embers going up and stuff like that. So you can actually create a really nice, dry, warming microclimate under your tarp that won't just keep the rain out, but it'll envelop you in warmer, drier air and push out that damp air. So you'll automatically be more comfortable just sitting by a fire. And it even works, if the tarp is low enough, it even works with a twig stove. And not the micro ones. Like I have like some ultralight ones for backpacking and stuff like that, but like a bigger twig stove, like a kid stove and bigger, you can really get it quite warm under there just by creating constant warm air, pushing the moist air out.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. Like with a stick stove, that's what we did on that trip where it constantly rained. Well, we got our tarp set up, and we had it set up like a sort of like a snowplow wedge type of thing, right? And it just with just a little twig stove going in there, it kept us quite warm. And if anybody wants to check out a video, check out my Temagami video there from about a year and a half ago. It has some really good tips on there for finding fat wood to burn, which is, like I say, all we had to burn. And we cooked on that because we didn't bring a gas stove or anything like that. We just use a twig stove. Which I don't recommend. Bring a gas stove with you as well. But you know what? By all means, if you have to burn fat wood, learn how to find it, learn how to identify it, because that can get you out of a real pinch too, right? So that's good. We do have another guest here in the basement here. I'm just going to bring him up now on stream. We have Rob from the Ontario Camping Couple. How you doing, Rob?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good. You got a question for the boys?
I do. So in May, I'm going to Algonquin for my first time in 40 years. I'm starting at Tim Lake and I'm going over to McManus, but I'm doing like a north to south all the way through, kind of like a big zigzag. I've only had 2 people mention to me where they think because I haven't been there in 40 years, where I should go. And one of them was Eustis Lake. So do you guys have a spot that you would recommend for somebody who hasn't been there for so long? And I'm trying to stay away from the big major parts of it and stay strictly and all the little offbeat and stuff. Is there a place that you guys would say is a must see in Algonquin?
You said you're going from Tim Lake and then ending up where? Where's your takeout?
McManus.
Oh,
So I'm going to
McManus.
end out at the bottom of Petawawa.
Nothing off the top of my head. To be honest with you, I don't spend a ton of time inside the park. It's mostly just along the outside, just along the outsides of it.
Where all the Crown land is,
where there's no reservations required. But I like, Tim River's beautiful, and that's a fantastic wildlife viewing corridor along there, and a good trout fishing opportunity through there as well. So you're taking out at 21. I'm just trying.
And I'm literally like doing a zigzag. I don't know if you guys will be able to see this, but that's part of it. I don't know if you see that. That's part of the map there. Like I'm literally going north to south through the whole park.
You're very ambitious, Rob.
Yeah, that's the route.
And I applied for a special permit to do it in 30 days, but because I don't have commercial insurance, they wouldn't give me the 30 days. So now I've got to try to do that same trip in 23.
Wow.
Well,
yeah,
Rob,
I'm not much out there. I'm not much of an Algonquin Park person myself. So
when you say zigzag, are you going like are you going over to Cedar and then across?
I'm well, what I'm doing is I start at Tim, and then I'm going down the Tim and then back up to the Nip, and then I was told to hit Gibson Lake. And then from there, I'm heading back down south, and then I'm going back up north, and I'm working my way up to Cedar Lake. And then from Cedar Lake, I'm heading down the Petawawa.
That is quite the trip. I'm going to say I don't have any suggestions because you're probably going to see a whole lot of beautiful spots along that route, man. That sounds like a fairly epic trip where you're crossing a whole lot of the park that's nicely off the beaten path and through some gorgeous topography there.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have any suggestions for you, Rob. It's really funny. You're talking to two guys here who practically
three really who are all Crownland campers, right?
Yeah, we're all Crownland campers, and two of us live like practically next door to Algonquin Park, but we don't have that much time in it because there's so much Crownland around. So I'm so sorry. I wish I had some.
That's okay. That's okay. Like I said, it's been 40 years.
Someone in the chat will. Someone in the chat surely will.
Yeah. Actually, I just posted something there. Pete's Portage said Birch Cliff is awesome.
Is it? Yeah, I am hitting Birch Cliff. I am hitting Birch Cliff.
But yeah, I did last May. I caught a real nice specky at the basin of the Petawawa on Cedar. So
really, yeah. See, that's another thing. I've never caught a trout in my life, so that's another thing I'm hoping for is to hit my first trout while I'm in the park.
Yeah.
So
and there was a comment. John M said earlier that he wasn't sure if either of the guests fish. Martin fishes and he's good at it, but he doesn't eat it. and I would love to eat more fish, but can't catch any. So
before I go, I just want to say if Landon's still watching, way to go! Like it's great to see younger kids getting out there like that. That's good for him. I hope he enjoys it.
Yeah, love that for sure. Well, thanks, Rob. Appreciate
no problem. Thanks, guys.
Have an awesome trip, man. Wow, that's killer.
Thanks,
yeah, it's an awesome trip. It's guaranteed to be awesome.
Yeah, the only thing that sucks is that my wife's in Australia, so I'm doing it. This is actually my first solo trip as well, like actual full solo trip too. Yeah. Yeah, so now I got to do all the heavy lifting, not her.
Well, remember, whenever you go tripping, you have to like the company of whoever you're going with, and that includes when you go solo.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Rob. Appreciate it, man. Yeah, you know what? That's funny how all three of us here are, kind of not not provincial park guys, really, right? It's try to stay away from the provincial parks at all costs. You know what? We covered a whole lot of stuff here: clothing, tents. What about sleeping systems? When it comes to spring camping, you know what? The weather is going to be a little cooler in the evenings as well. A lot more so than the daytime. What would we say? Is it the same as winter camping, pretty much?
Not as extreme, but you're going to need something better than your little Thermarest Pro Light that you use in the summer, because the ground temperature is going to be a lot colder. So you need more insulation from the ground. That's nothing else much changes for me. I'm just going to use a heavier sleeping bag and something that's better than just a summer sleeping pad. Oh wait, no, there is something, but this is again comparable to winter camping. I have base layer that I'm going to wear during the day. It's usually merino wool. But then I have a sleeping base layer that I use only for sleeping in. And then that's kind of a thicker synthetic that I use. And it's what I use in the winter. And I bring that in the spring and in the autumn as well. And that's so that I'm not sleeping in the base layer that I need to be active in all day, and that will have absorbed some moisture. It has time to dry out. I will night dry my gear inside my sleeping bag, but not wear it. It'll just be on top of me, like loose laundry inside, and it'll dry out overnight. But the base layer I wear at night is completely different. So I have just like I have dedicated sleeping socks, I have a dedicated base layer that I wear at night. That's early in the spring and late in the fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I don't do as much in the bag drying as Martin does, because I have a little bit more integrated thermal value myself. So I find it sometimes a little tight in there. But I will say this: if I don't have far to go, I will totally bring my foam mat for my sleeping pad to go on top of. No ifs, ands, or buts. I'll deal with a bit of extra bulk. It weighs almost nothing, so it's just a little bit of extra bulk. But man, that extra bit of that extra layer under your sleeping pad in the early spring, it goes a long ways, and it also works as a fantastic sit pad and kneeling pad, because that ground is hard and cold, and that helps a lot. So that foam mat that I'll use winter camping under my sleeping pad. Again, if I'm not going too far, I'm absolutely bringing that thing, because it's worth it for that good, comfortable sleep, and for your knees and your butt when you're hanging around the fire and doing work around the fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing I never considered was making sure you got a good underpad for sitting on the ground or your chair. But yeah, you want to keep yourself warm, because the ground is still giving off or permeating a lot of cold as well, right? So that's yeah, for sure. Thanks, Christian. I appreciate the super chat there. Much appreciated. We do have one more person in the basement, but before I bring him up here, I just wanted to say that we do have the a poll going there in the chat there. Are you planning on an ISO trip for this year? Answer yes, no, or not sure. I'm going to close that in a minute there, and we'll see what our final results are on that. With that being said, let's bring up Donald Dakota. And also, you know what? If you have any final questions, maybe for rapid fire, please post them now, and we'll get them up here before the show's done. Donald, how you doing tonight, sir?
Good. How are you doing, Dennis?
Doing okay. You got a question for the boys?
Yes, a question and a comment. Hello, Pine Martin. Hello, Nate. Hope you guys have been doing well.
Very well, thanks.
Great. So you guys have hit on some great topics. Especially, I posted that question about a tarp over the fire. Pine, you were right on with that, the whole high pressure thing. So, but my comment and question is, so when you're planning a spring route, and let's say you have a number, you're going with the flow, lakes into rivers. Do you guys look at topographical to see if there's rapids or falls near where the portage landing is at? Like in Quetico and the Boundary Waters, a lot of places can be dangerous on the top side of rapids and falls in the spring because of high water. And maybe in the summer, it's easy to get to that landing, but boy, come spring, that's a whole different story. So what's your thoughts on that?
So I usually avoid anything that's going to have rapids.
Yes.
So that's always my biggest concern. And really, maps don't always tell you the right story, right?
Right.
So, if you have accurate accurate satellite images, then that's the way to go, because you can usually see any kind of rapid at a certain time of year. It'll look all frothy white in the image, right? And that will tell you a lot. But that's all about all I could suggest. In the main, I avoid trips where I'm going to be going down a stretch of river in the early spring. I just had like some scary moments where I was just getting carried, and now I don't do that.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I like to avoid moving water, so in the spring anyway. So yeah, yes, very good, true. And the satellite imagery, that is true. You could really get a lot of information on that the maps won't show you. So excellent. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I'm in sort of Martin's camp with that. Those aren't the kind of routes I plan for early spring if I'm unsure of the water levels. It's just not worth it to take the risk for the reasons I go out there. So I usually save a bit more of the adventurous stuff for late spring or July or August. And if the water levels don't work out, then that's not the end of the world.
Or we got to throw this into our trips with Jim Baird. The semi-frozen Temagami region, right?
No comment.
Sorry, Nate, that had to come up, man.
Yeah, actually, hang on. I gotta do a plug here for Nate. So Nate did this epic trip with a number of YouTubers, including Jim Baird, and it was a bit of a suffer fest, hot tenting and snowshoeing across slushy lakes during premature thaws and rains and stuff like that, just before and during their time there. And a number of them have made videos, and Nate has made a video.
Very good video too.
Yeah, and you will want to watch that.
Yeah.
Someone
so
should.
Nate, is this the official start of your YouTube channel?
You know what, Dennis? I'm going to give it a shot. It's not going to be something I'm able to devote a whole ton of time to, but I'm going to try to at least stay somewhat consistent with it. And it's just going to, for me, be a little bit of a different outlet than my usual Instagram stuff, because I was getting into really long form stories on Instagram. And I thought, just to switch it up and to keep my creative gears churning, I'm going to give this a shot. There's really generous words from Martin, so thank you. And I was really grateful and very lucky to be invited on that trip and for it to turn into the kind of adventure that it did and end on the very safe side of things. And watching those guys do what they do on that kind of trip, and to be able to pull out the kind of filming that they did is it's something else. Just gives me an immense degree of respect for those guys, Max, Xander, and Jim, to be doing the trip we did and still filming the way they did the entire time. It's just so I'm sort of an iPhone guy, and I bought myself a GoPro, and we're all hanging out, and they're like pulling out all this camera gear, like bags here and boxes there. And Max is like, so what are you using for a camera? I held up my phone, and he like stops, and he's like, your phone. Your phone. And I felt very sheepish, and you know what? But it all sort of just worked out anyways. And I learned so much every single day from those guys, and
that was awesome. You did a great job on that, and I'm glad you're going to be starting a little channel, because I enjoy your content. For anybody that has not yet subscribed to Nate's channel, by all means, just go over to look up Nate Muskoka. The link is in the description below there, so you can get on there, hit that sub, and hit the notification too, so you know when he posts a new video next time too. So that's awesome.
Thank you,
Donald. Sorry.
No, you know what? I've really enjoyed Donald's input on this show lately. When he pops up, it's always good, and the questions are always. I always like listening to what he has to say. So thanks, Donald.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. Appreciate it. Enjoy the show a lot. So
awesome, Donald. Stick around for the green room if you like.
Sounds great. Then we'll talk to you guys later.
See you in a short bit.
Oh.
All right, guys. Oh, sorry. Did you have a comment for him?
Yeah, John had a John's knee. John's got his leg propped up and his ice on his knee, but he did have a good question. Just a couple back there.
I'm gonna bring that up. I'm gonna bring it up. Yeah, that's rapid fire. That's gonna be rapid fire, which will start right now. How's that?
Okay, sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump the gun.
No, we got about 4 or 5 minutes here.
Right.
Let's pull up. I got 4 starred questions here. Okay, so Richard West was asking way earlier in the chat there. Any close call stories in your past? I think that's from around the time that we were talking about, where things can go wrong out there.
So I used to be. This was before I even met Martin, and I got away with sort of a lot of really stupid stuff. And now that I look back on it, I was, it's kind of like, what was I thinking? And a lot of it had to do with springtime paddling, where the Big East River is sort of my go-to thing. And there was a couple times, one time in particular, I was actually with a visiting sales rep for a very large outdoors company. And I said, yeah, we're going to go do this. He wanted to go and do something. We went on this, we went paddling down the Big East River, totally clear, totally fine. Came out onto the lake. And we had to get from the outlet of the river over to Hutchison Beach, and there was ice, and we could not go back upriver. And so we had to we each got out of one side of the canoe and braced our arms across the gunnels and walked the canoe across the ice over chunks of ice to the beach. And that was probably the sketchiest thing I've done. And then the next one was very, very similar to it, just at a different portion of that lake at a different time, where it looked like the channel was open between the lake and these narrows that lead into town. And it was not. And so a friend and I had to do the same thing, where we each got out onto the ice on either side of the canoe, and with our weight sort of over the canoe and our legs kind of pushing ourselves forward, we actually had to cross like 100 meters or so of ice to get to the open water on the other side. And that was super, super, super sketchy.
Yeah, unnerving, right?
Yeah.
Well, how about you, Martin? I know you told your story about being eye spotted there with the
powder. Yeah, that was stupid. Well, another stupid thing I did is when I didn't know anything about paddling in current, and I thought, so what? It's going to be, more or less like flat water paddling, and just got swept, right up into a sweeper. It wasn't a strainer, it wasn't underwater, it was above, but like just couldn't avoid it, and just got carried right into it. And then of course the canoe got broadsided, and I did the thing you're not supposed to do, which is I leaned away from it as I was approaching this tree that was, and branches. Across this what creek was this? I can't remember. It'll come to me. Anyway, it's in southwestern Ontario. And we both, cringed, pulled away. So now the upstream side of the bow was tipping down and water started to pour in. And I just realized, where this was going to go, and managed to right ourselves and hold on to the tree. And fortunately, we were able to sort of move ourselves along with enough branches on vertical branches on the tree to pull ourselves to the shore and get out of the boat. But we were almost pinned and swamped up against this tree, and the danger there is you can get carried under. Wow. So that was a close call. Absolutely no harm came of it, and we righted ourselves really, really quickly. But it's another second later in our reaction time, and we would have gone right under. So and we would have been stuck there, trapped. It was
not fun.
That was a close call.
Close call.
Yeah.
We got one more here that we're going to take, and we'll close out the show on this one here. And I think it's the one that Nate was asking about from John there, asking Martin and Nate, you're both very technical campers, borderline scientific. Is camping more of a science or an art to you?
Oh, that's an interesting philosophical question. Well, it's part art and it's part science. I mean, what draws me to it is purely the aesthetics of it. It does something to my soul, and I love the beauty of it out there. So, I mean, camping is all art in that sense, and it's a deeply aesthetic experience for me. But understanding how your body works, understanding fluid dynamics of canoeing and paddling and stuff like that, and knowing something about air temperature changes and stuff like that, and what makes a fire burn and how to get it burning and stuff like that. All of this scientific knowledge actually accentuates and empowers you when you're out there. So, knowledge is power. And our ancestors knew things about how to camp that we have long forgotten, that for them was just practically innate knowledge because they'd been handed down for so long and they'd been doing it every day of their lives, right? What we call camping is how people used to live, but without high-tech equipment. Right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's equal parts science and art. I'm just a bit of a science geek, so I express a lot of scientific concepts when I try to explain why things work and why things don't, and best practices and stuff like that.
Sure. How will you, Nate?
And that's why we love you, Martin. Yeah, for me, it's sort of similar in that the more I know about something, the more I find I can get enjoyment out of it because it somehow makes more sense to me. And that plays into the logic of why I do what I do while I'm out there. Because it to me, if what I do is logical and makes sense for what I know, then I feel more comfortable. I feel more at ease. I feel at peace. Camping for me is completely like a sublime experience. It's very sort of philosophical. I think Martin sort of hit the nail on the head. I enjoy camping for the sheer joy of being out and sort of immersing myself in nature that way, not necessarily to nail down a technique that I'd been reading about or something like that. I read a lot more Sigurd Olson than I do Cliff Jacobson. To me, the reasons why I go out there are purely sort of sublime, philosophical, and aesthetic, and the knowledge I carry with me just helps me enjoy it that much more and helps me make sense of why things are the way they are. So it's kind of equal parts, but definitely for me leaning a bit more towards the philosophical, towards the sort of the pure sheer enjoyment of simplifying things right down to a campfire and a starry night.
Yep. There is a science to camping, right? Yep. Awesome. Well, you know what, Nate, Martin, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Great show. We could go on probably forever about this here because there's so many different facets of spring canoe trip planning that we could touch on. At least we did touch on some of the safety stuff too. Everybody, you know what, if you're planning a spring ice out trip, please be safe out there. Make sure you are well prepared for anything that Mother Nature can throw at you, because believe me, she's got a wicked curveball, okay, and she'll throw it at you. So with that being said, we'll we'll leave it at that there. We do have past episodes of our spring canoe trip planning from the past seasons, last season and the season before. You just need to go back through my past season playlists and find it. But you know what? The information there, even though it may be a year or two old, is still going to be just as pertinent as it would be today if we hadn't mentioned it. So by all means, feel free to check that out if you are planning a trip, and be safe out there. Yeah, guys, thanks very much again for joining me. Once again, Martin's stuff is all in the chat or in the description below. So is Nate's. If you want to find them a little more on social media, check out some of Martin's videos and catch some of those Nate Muskoka new videos that'll be coming out soon. I'm hoping.
Thanks very much for having me, Dennis. It was really a pleasure.
Sure, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you, Dennis.
See you gents in the basement in a moment here.
Sure.
Well, hopefully everybody enjoyed tonight's show. You know what? I always learn from these shows, and I'm not afraid to say it. You know what? That's why I do these shows, is because I can learn just as much as you do. Just before we do close out here, just want to mention that join us next week. We'll be joined by Will Collins from the Buffalo Roamer podcast. This fella is pretty interesting. He actually paddled the Mississippi River in 103 days from source to sea. And he also did a 70-day adventure canoeing through the whole length of the Yukon River. So join us next week, and as we talk to Will Collins. That would probably be about it for this week. You know what? follow us on Facebook, and you'll get all the skinny on what's coming up with the show. And yeah, we'll leave it at that. So anyways, everybody, have yourselves a great week. Thanks very much for tuning in tonight. And remember to keep the adventures alive. Cheers, everyone.